Hi, everyone. I don't know if I'm muted or not. Um, I see
You're
some
not.
familiar names, so it's very nice to see that. Thank you.
All right. Just let a couple more folks come in. And I will say good evening and welcome to our virtual Wayland Library event. It's good to see everyone. Um, Tonight, we are here for our first of our Great Presenters 2021 series. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you'll continue to join us once a month through May, with the exception of April. And then we skip the summer and go to October, November, December. But Steve and I will both be sending emails about that. So tonight we have Conrad Gees here to talk to us about Cuba, more than classic American cars and 1950s nostalgia. Conrad is a retired Wayland school teacher who now has the time to pursue his love of photographing the world around him. His photography is aimed at trying to record what Henri Cartier-Bresson described as the decisive moment, moments when swift chance, disarray, wonder, and experiment lead to an image which speaks to more than the subject at hand. Much as a poem can convey meaning far beyond a literal interpretation, he looks forward to viewers seeing this in his photographs. So thank you so much to Conrad for being here tonight. I just have a couple of Zoom housekeeping notes. First, we're recording this session for broadcast, so you'll be able to catch it on Waycam and also on YouTube, on their YouTube and the library's YouTube. Second, Conrad will be showing his photos, and I recommend that you switch to speaker view during that part of the presentation, so you'll see Conrad and his photos next to him. And finally, feel free to put your questions into the chat at any time, and we'll take a couple of pauses to answer them, and then open up for a discussion unmuted towards the end. So with that, I think I will hand it over to Conrad. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. And wow, this is kind of neat. Hi, everybody. I see some faces out there that I have not seen in a while, and that's very exciting and encouraging. Thank you. Thank you all. I'm humbled by this. I figured there'd be maybe 2 people interested in this. I do want to say thank you to the Wayland Library for setting up this forum, and in particular, Steve Engler and Courtney Michaels, who are organizing this particular event tonight. You know, the idea for this presentation actually came about 2 years ago. I had put up some prints taken from a couple of early trips to Havana in the Raytheon room, and they asked me if I would do a great presenter. I kind of hate that term because I'm like, really great presenter? But anyway, if I would do a presentation on this. And, you know, right when they asked, I had just finished a 4th trip to Havana. And I viewed this as a good way to try and focus me and get me to cull these images, do some editing, and see if I could put together a body of work that's informative. The original plan was to have an exhibit of prints in the Raytheon room. Being a photographer, prints are like books, you know. Digital is just it's okay, but it's not the same. But given what's going on with COVID, I'm learning new things. I always got to learn new things, and this will, I'm a neophyte at Zoom, but hopefully I've put together a series of images tonight that you'll find interesting. So as I say, neophyte at Zoom, please forgive me if I'm not pulling this off quite right. One of the things that I find that I miss about being at the Raytheon room is that if I had you there, I could read your faces. I could also, you could interrupt me with questions. I was a teacher for many years, and questions are what drive a lesson, and what it's kind of like if you're a musician, you want applause, you want to read the people's faces. I'm hoping you will have questions.
Oh, we'll have questions.
Okay, good. The nature of Zoom is such that your questions will go to Courtney via chat. I will pause at periodic points to take questions. And some, of course, at the end, hopefully there'll be a discussion on some of the stuff that just gels when we get to the end of this, okay? So feel free in thinking about questions too. Questions about the images, questions about how I go about taking pictures, any technical questions, on camera and stuff. I usually don't bother with that, but I know people like that. I don't bother talking about it. And also questions about Cuba and what it's like. How do you travel there as an American citizen, especially now? I will tell you, I went in 2019 when everybody thought it was off limits again because of the reversals that the Trump administration made, but you can go and you can still go now. So we can talk about that in more detail later. This project, I call it Los Habaneros, which is the people of Havana, Havanians, okay? It's an ongoing project. And the project really developed as I got to Cuba. And, you get to Cuba, you have a whole set sort of images in your mind, the cars, the buildings, etc. But once I got there, it was the people. And slowly as things develop and I make more connections, I've been there 4 times now and I get to know the people better. That is what's driving me. And, I will say it's Los Habaneros rather than about Cuba because it is really just 3 neighborhoods in Havana that I focus on. The 3 that the tourists go to a lot, well, actually 2, Habana Vieja, which is old Havana, which is what you'll see when you're looking at ads for trips to Cuba. The Vedado area, which is 50s, it has colonial houses, but also 50s and 60s. It was the site of the hotels and where Meyer Lansky and all the casinos were. And Centro Habana, which is really where your typical Havana citizen, that's where you'll find them. It's not a tourist area. Most tourists don't go there, but it's right smack in the middle of the 2. It's actually where most of the pictures come from. So those are the 3 areas I'm focusing on. I'll try and point some of those out as we go through it. And I will just tell you that, as I say, in 2015, this project began, and quite by accident. It was illegal to go to Cuba. And, I bend rules, but I don't necessarily break them. But my mother-in-law, it was Thanksgiving, November of 2014, when my mother-in-law at 92 had booked a trip to go to Cuba by herself. It was a second trip. She was going to fly through Mexico. She had this connection through the underground. My wife and I tried to talk her out of it. Said, "What are you, nuts? You can't go to Cuba." But she was going, and I fell asleep in the conversation with my wife. And when I woke up, my wife said, "You're going with her. You're taking your camera." And that's how this started. So let me go to the pictures, and that's all you need to know so far. And we will go from there. Let's see, let's open up. Here we go. Does everyone see those? That's right. You're on mute. I see a couple of heads shaking, so good.
We see them, we see them.
Good, thank you. Los Habaneros. I'm going to start off with 10 pictures, including this, which are going to give you a broad overview of sort of the 10 topics I'm going to talk about tonight. Okay? And I'll just run through a little of these without much discussion. And as we get to them, they'll introduce each section and I'll do a little more talking then, but here we go. And that's going to bring us to our first section. I'm a street photographer when I'm in Cuba. It's no studio work, nothing like that. Basically, I get up, I've been there 4 times a week each time, and it's usually this week that I go in February. And my method of taking pictures is to wake up at 6, go out before breakfast, start walking the streets, no particular destination in mind, come back for a little breakfast, go out again, and basically walk till 8 or 9 at night, taking pictures of things I see, people I meet. I titled this first section Transitions, because in 2015 when I went, we booked, I went through Mexico, because when we actually booked, as Mom said, I said it was illegal, and we had to go underground. So the only way to do it was to go through Mexico or Canada. I went through Mexico. Because we went in February, Obama announced in January that he wanted to ease restrictions. So I was like, well, that's novel. But, and I felt better about that. But once we got there, since we were on our own, you could go as an American before, but you couldn't go unescorted. Traveling on your own was different. And I was going with her to protect her, but also she speaks Spanish. I don't. That was that winter of all the snow too. So she actually got delayed, and I ended up for 4 days there on my own before she came. And I was like, oh my God, but it was magical. So what you're seeing here, at that point, Cuba was again in dire straits. Soviet Union, well, in the 90s when it fell apart, that left Cuba really in tough shape. And here they were starting to experiment with small business enterprise. So what you would see are these little shops being set up. That's the transition I'm talking about. See the neighborhood behind, you see a woman there who set up a juice bar. This is where I stayed. I'm looking out my window. This is 4 blocks from the Capitol building, and that was the view across the street. I stayed in someone's home, a casa particular. The man who ran it, Gerardo Calderon, wonderful man, we've become good friends. He was a doctor who started opening up his house to people to stay. And this is the neighborhood he's in. I'm literally 4 blocks from the Capitol building. This is what Havana's looking like. This is on the Malecon. And what you see there is what 50% of Havana, well, 20%, they were starting to tear it apart and rebuild it. This is inside some of these buildings. I got there, I wanted to explore going inside. And I learned some things. This is the very first day. I'm thinking a lot of this is abandoned and people are storing things. And I saw this tile and I wanted to get a picture of tile. And I wondered, what are all these wires running across that tile work? I wonder why that's there. And there's the same tile work and the bench. And I'm like, oh, okay. Still not realizing what those wires are for until I get deep into a building and I find this. And there's the light, there's wires going through it, somebody's hanging, and all of a sudden I realize there's people living in this place. I was scared just being in there thinking this was gonna fall down on me and what was I doing illegal? And then I realized, oh my gosh, these are apartments. So I took that picture, started walking out. There was a policeman watching me from one exit about 50 yards away and 2 guys on the other side. This is my first day there. And I'm going, are these guys gonna, mug me, or do I go with the cop? Am I doing something illegal? I decided to go with the cop, right? But that was my first introduction to a little bit what life was there. Turns out the cop and the guys were both very excited once they found out I was American to greet me, but this is what it was. So a lobby in another building. This was looking out the window of the place I was staying at. Now, I put this picture in part because what you have to understand about those 3 neighborhoods in Havana is that the UN has designated them as World Heritage Sites. And that's because Havana, because of its history going back so far, has the widest range of architectural treasures in the Western Hemisphere, dating from Spanish colonial architecture all the way right up to the 50s, when they were still building very innovative and modern buildings there. And there's so many that they're trying to preserve. And this is to give you an idea, this is where people are living. You can see how beautiful these buildings were once, but they are really falling apart. And this is typical, you see this everywhere in Havana. I will tell you what, there's a very famous architect, and I wish I could remember his name right now, who in the 90s convinced Fidel that we've got to save this. And even though American tourists can't go there, tourists from all over the rest of the world can. Canada, Mexico, Europe, Asia. And what he said was, when people come to visit, stay in hotels, 10% of everything the tourists bring in is going to go into a fund to rebuild Havana and preserve these architectural treasures. And you really do see that going on in a lot of neighborhoods. I'll try and show some of that to you later. But just to give you an idea of what it's like for the people living there, this is what it's looking like. This is again 2 blocks from the capital. Somebody's going into their home there. And then you hit the tourist area, and that's why I say transitions. The hotels, many of them are owned by European conglomerates. The Spanish Hotel Iberico owns the Park Central. You know, the Cubans own a few, but they are bringing money in and they're restoring some of these places. And that's the Angleterra at the Park Central. This is 3 blocks from where I was staying. So you can see where I'm staying, where the people are living, and then you can see where the tourists stay. That is in the Vedado area. The Habana Vieja was something interesting that I didn't realize there. That was the Havana Hilton, built in 1958. 6 months after it opened, so it's 59. 6 months after it opened, Fidel rolls in, Batista leaves, takes over the city, and that becomes his headquarters, that hotel. It overlooks some of the casinos, and he was like trying to drive the mob and the casinos out. So that is where, when you go inside, you can see where he stayed, and it's interesting late 50s modernistic architecture there. Also in parts of Habana Vieja, you see where they're constantly recycling stuff, and they're making, you know, like this is an old refrigerator sign. This is at a hotel, at a restaurant on the street where tourists would go eat. This is in the Plaza Vieja. The bands and the music playing outside of one of the cafes. Then you see some new sort of fast food restaurants starting to open up. You don't see many of those, but there's a few. But you can see what the streets are like and what it's like when they open those up. You also see the tourist trinkets coming from China, many. And then a cell phone. That was unusual on my first trip that I saw this. This is one of the cooks waiting outside the restaurant on the main street where the tourists go. And if you're going across this, you can see that things are not rebuilt yet. Another new establishment. And then I finished with this one because this was at a restaurant where these guys were just waiting to feed the tourists. It was before lunch. So that's the transitions. Courtney, I don't know if any questions are coming up yet. Doesn't have to. I can go for a little bit before we start that.
I think we just had a couple comments. Someone was asking for your website, so I shared that. And Steve was lucky to go to Havana in 2016 for a softball trip, but it's sad to see so many old buildings wrecked by hurricane damage.
It's true. You know, when you look at the hurricanes that blow through there, I mean, Havana, the lower part of it, Vieja, Centro, and Vedado, that's in the lowest part of the city. And they really are right on the Malecon, which is that famous boulevard you see in all the tourist things. That building I showed you, the second or third picture, this one here. This is this one. I'm standing on the Malecon here, and literally at my back are the Straits of Florida. Now, 2 years later, the building on the right is gone, and they've got a new building up there. You know, they totally replaced that. And here's the sign that we're talking about the restoration there. But when a hurricane comes through, that whole area will be flooded. I was there for a few storms, and the waves just, you know, blow up. They close down the streets sometimes because of it.
Wow.
Um,
I'm wondering how many pictures you take for each of these that you've selected.
Good question. When you're shooting on the street, you react quickly. Out of the 4 trips, I average about 5,000 pictures on each trip.
Wow.
So it's about 20,000 images that I have now. I've boiled this down to about 120. And depending on what I do, I've done 2 other projects, which I won't show you tonight. But so out of those 20,000, maybe I've got 250, 300 that I'd show, and maybe I've got 50 that I love.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
I mean, so it's the nature of the beast with street photography.
Yeah. We have one more question from another Steve. How was your interaction with the locals? What did you perceive was their condition or attitude?
That's a great question, Steve. And I would say that over the 4 trips, it evolved. On the very first trip, literally on the second, well, there'll be 2 stories I'll tell you a little later, but people were completely surprised to have an American walking the streets. And I was apprehensive the first couple of times I said it, and then quickly realized that it was like God walking down the streets. People were so excited that there might be an opening of relations, and in particular, a lifting of the embargo, which has not happened, as we know, that everybody wanted to talk to me. And my Spanish, poquito español, you know, what I discovered was there are many Cuban men who speak German, which was helpful. And I'm really good with French, so I could figure enough Spanish and stuff. But it didn't matter. I smiled, I was American, they wanted to interact, you know. So it was amazing.
Great.
And I find when you travel, if you know, taking pictures can be intrusive. You have to start to understand how to do that. I never use a long lens. I never sneak a photo. People always know when I'm taking their picture. You know, even here, she's not looking at me, but I'm standing right there and she can see that I'm taking her picture. If somebody says no, it's like, okay, no problem, you know, smile on the face, do it that way, and try and engage. I do try and engage almost always when I take a picture. This is, so anyway, any other questions right now? Because okay.
No, I think we're good.
So this second part here has to do with the mornings. And again, the mornings were, in the beginning, especially when I just discovered so much as people were getting up and getting out. This is a high school girl. I can tell because she's wearing the blue and the red and white. Blue is the high school color uniforms. All students get a uniform. Middle school is yellow and elementary school is red. And that's across the entire country. No matter how well off, because there's a few people there that have some money, or impoverished you are, you will get the clothes you need and you will get the books, and the schools are very well supplied. Anyway, she's waiting to go to school in front of a market that I did go into. These guys are having their morning breakfast. There are dogs all over the place. I'd say 80% of them are unleashed. It's not to say they're not owned, but they're unleashed and they're always begging. And this is on one of the main working streets, and having breakfast. This is, I showed you that the Inglaterra Hotel at the Parc Central. This is a block away from it. So you can see how certain areas where the tourists are coming, they've rebuilt and they've redone. They've also got 2 or 3 streets in the Vieja area, which are beautifully redone. It's almost like a Disneyland, except that they've really stuck to architectural norms, even in how they built, you know, which I'll talk about. But this is what it looks like. This is what the streets look like. There's the kids. This is that yellow building in the corner, turn left, and I was in a block. These kids I see in the morning heading to middle school, elementary school kids. this was interesting. This is one of those discoveries you get. I was looking at this going, why the heck do they have a bus written in French? And it was only later that I realized, as you start looking around, because of the embargo, to get in vehicles, to get in a lot of things that they need, a lot of times they're picking up these things secondhand inexpensively from other countries that they're getting rid of them. So this is formerly a bus from France that they use there to transport, you know, kids around. So I was like, oh, just one of those little things that, you know, you see and you question and you go, what's this about? These kids were going over their homework, elementary school kids. And as I say, you can see the uniforms, everybody's got the same, but, you know, they've got a bunch of them, and, you know, you can't tell whether someone is, you know, living on the margins or has a little bit of money by looking at the uniforms. That you don't see. So that's the mornings. And I'll just go into this next part real quick because it ties into what I just said. Because of the embargo and the collapse of the Soviet Union, I don't want to blame say the US embargo is the only problem. Cuba's got a lot of problems. And work around it, but they've got a lot of problems with the economy and making things work. They don't get many goods in. You don't go to a store there to buy stuff. You can find radios, you can find TVs, but it is nothing like here. And a lot of times people are just bringing in old boom boxes and say, can you fix this? And these guys with the cars, with everything, you know, they'll fix it one way or the other. It won't be with original parts, but they'll figure out how to fix it. So this guy, as you see, he does TVs, he does color TVs, he does boom boxes, he does DVDs, he does everything. And it's just his little desk there, and he's working, right? Books. Cuba has a very high literacy rate. Fidel, one of the things he did when he came in, the literacy rate was 40%. And he said, no more of that. Everybody in this country will get an education and learn to read. And in 2 years, he mobilized 150,000 teachers, anybody who could read. He said, I'm going to pay you. You're going to go out, you're going to go to the country, everybody's going to learn to read in 2 years. And he got really very close to that goal. Literacy rate in Cuba now is very high. And even at the end of those first 2 years, by 1961 or 62, I think the rate had gone from 40% to 89%. And now it's in the high 90s all the time. Everyone can read, but you don't find books. So, you know, I saw this guy on the first trip fixing these books, and I went in and I'm like, what's going on, right? He says, oh, these are all classics. The binding's falling apart. I'm going to glue this, put this on, do this here. He was selling some of these books here. And I discovered on my subsequent trips, what I do is I bring books, you know, I'd pack my suitcase up with anything I could find and everything, bring it over, and somebody would always take it. I'll fix this, I'll sell this, I'll do it, you know. I didn't see a single bookstore with new books, other than books about Fidel, books about Raul, books about socialism, you know, that they would publish. And maybe they had the others, I just didn't see it. You know, I don't want to completely say it didn't happen, but this is what a bookstore looked like. This is at the University of Havana. And again, finding the internet the first year was really tough. The only place I could get the internet was going to one of the hotels and buying a card. The university had it. So you can see there, they've got their chalkboard with the stuff, but they still got the file folders and they still got the books, and, you know, pretty interesting for a university library. This is one of the pictures that, for me at least, speaks volumes. Here we are at a market that sells produce and meat. And if you look closely at that knife was made by someone. That's rebar. It's a piece of metal. This guy is just sharpening it, right? But it's not like somebody went out and bought a Henkel knife or something like that, right? And you'll see, I always saw these people going around with sharpening stones on their bicycles and just pulling up at houses, and, you know, you need a knife sharpened, you know, do it for you. This was in an auto body shop. No, not an auto body shop. This is where they're rebuilding a car. This guy's working on a grill. And again, you can see with the tools, right? You got a basic motor. I'm sure he built this table and he's got the brush going on it, and they use those motors. They put grinding wheels, saws, everything on that, As long as it spins, we'll find a tool, a blade that'll go on it. It's amazing, the handicraft that goes on there. It's also amazing. OSHA would shut down half that country, It's like, oh my God. This was something I'd never seen. These guys are fixing up a mattress. And most of this work goes on in the street. A lot of this work goes on in the street. This is what I saw next to them. Whether they were going to use that ever again, I don't know. But they were stuffing, they were sewing. Somebody was going to get a mattress back in that night. And I just love this picture because of, the sweatshirt from America, Marco Island, the stuff. This guy, he and his assistant, then there's one other guy, he needed his hammer fixed, right? So rather than go and buy a new hammer, he goes to the local, I guess, carpenter, you'd call it, who has a pile of wood behind him. And he started making that blade you see there. Okay, that you see there, right? First he cut it, then he put on his sanding wheel and grinding wheel. He's shaping the handle. He's getting it all set. The guy's testing it. There he is. He's sanding right there. I watched this for about 15 minutes, and I'm just like, oh my God. Right? Here we break a hammer, you go buy a new hammer. There it's like, okay, you can see the wood in the background. And part of this shop is open to the air up top, and this is where he's working. And that's basically why it's recycle and repair, for a lot of stuff. Should I pause a minute? Any questions, or we keep going? Because we can also save the questions till the end.
I think you can keep going.
Okay. Food is interesting. Two things I didn't see there. I didn't see anybody homeless on the street. And I know that I was using this, I think this has just changed, but there were two kinds of money. There was the CUC, the Cuban convertible peso, which is what tourists use and I use. And then there was the Cuban peso, the CUP. The prices you'll see in places like this are by the CUP. It's basically, the CUC is tied to the US dollar. So one CUC is $1 US. The Cuban peso is 1/25th that. One Cuban peso is 4 cents. You use the CUC because, first of all, it's the only thing you can convert to. And when you leave, it's the only thing you can reconvert back into dollars. But what I discovered was when you were reading a price, that there was one little window that I went to for coffee one morning, right? It said 1 CU. I didn't read closely, it was a CUP. And I gave the guy a CUC, my money. He looks at it, he's like, whoa, right? And I thought, okay, he probably doesn't see this too often. What surprised me was when he came back and he gave me change. He gave me back 23 Cuban pesos. That cup of coffee cost me 8 cents. And it was phenomenal. It was, the coffee is like, if you've ever been in Mexico and you have Mexican coffee or Cuban coffee or any coffees from the Central American countries, it's just like, we drink awful coffee. If you go to the hotels there, they serve you European coffee or they serve you American coffee, and a CUC is a CUC. It's not a CUC, it's going to cost you $3 like going to Starbucks. And it's nowhere near as good. So, when you're seeing these prices in these places out here, it's very inexpensive. The food, Cuba it doesn't import food either. The food is all grown in Cuba. And because they also can't import pesticides, it's pretty much all organic. The meat tastes like the meat I remember eating when I was 5 and 6, right? As a kid. Doesn't taste like Purdue chicken, it tastes like chicken. The produce is blemished at times, you know, but who cares, you know? Now, I do that talk about the money because what you have to understand is that what was a typical salary for a month? 20 to $40 is what the average Cuban earns in a month. Kooks. Now, you don't have to spend that much. You do have food ration stores where you go for oil, beans, rice, bread, but they're inadequate. You don't get much. I went into one. The shelves are pretty bare, and even the women were laughing, going, "Look at this. This is nothing, right?" But you do have all this other food out on the streets that you can get. There's another produce market. You will often see in produce markets pictures of Che or Fidel or, you know, somebody. And you get an idea of what the produce looks like, you know. Meat. It's not, you know, you can certainly get meat and people eat it. Probably like a lot of other impoverished countries, it's not the whole meal, right? It's used to supplement stuff. But you'll see there, it's not refrigerated. You buy the meat, you cook it, it's slaughtered probably that day or only a day or two before. And it's there to go. And, you know, in the evenings, I would see, you know, after the moms pick up kids at school, they'd be walking home with a plucked chicken, or they'd be buying this and that, buying their produce. You would basically buy your food almost every day and do it that way. Refrigerators that I did see, and there were refrigerators in houses, they tended to be smaller. So the food was turned over very quickly. Here's another meat place. Another produce place. And when you went into certain stores, right, a lot of times you'd go in, they did have convenience stores, believe it or not, right? But a lot of times what you'd see is the same product. One version of orange juice, or one toothpaste, or one, right? And it would just be, you know, there it is. Just pick one up if you need it. At one point with my mother-in-law, we decided that we needed some toilet paper, right? We didn't want to ask Corrado. Took me 2 hours to find toilet paper. But I'm not a native. I mean, it sure doesn't take them 2 hours. But when I did find it, I got to a store, because yeah, we got some here. And there were 6 rolls. And I bought like 4. And they're like, "What are you kidding?" You know, I'm like, sorry. You know, I felt guilty about that afterwards. But yeah, so it's just a different way of looking at things. The second, one other anecdote on that. The second Casa Particular I stayed in, Gerardo had moved, and I couldn't go back to his. I stayed in his 3 times, but only the second time I didn't. I stayed with a couple. She was Cuban. He was from Holland, and he had traveled there, fell in love with this woman, decided, we got to get married. And she says, "Well, I'm not leaving Cuba." And he's like, "Fine, I'll live here," right? And he decided he was going to live. So they started this Casa Particular. And it was one of the key things I remember talking about it, because I was asking about life in Cuba and life, you know, he's like, "Oh God, this stories, you know." But he loved it. He ended up loving it. But he said, "You know, I still make this mistake. I say to my wife, I'm going out to get oranges," right? She goes, "No, it's Cuba. You're going out to see what's out there." You know, you don't go out looking for something, you go out to see what's there, and I'll figure it from that. So I was like, okay. Produce. I remember that girl standing in front of the high school girl. That was the guy behind, selling oranges, which they peel and then you just eat there with a little salt. They're actually delicious. This is early Sunday morning. I got up at 6, walked out the door. It was a half a block away from where I was staying. And I saw all these pork carcasses, right? Just been slaughtered, just been eviscerated, just been cleaned, but not yet butchered. I come back 3 hours later, and they're open for business. And that was the Sunday meal for a lot of people. So that's just to give you an idea of what's what. Oh, I threw this in because Told you how much things cost. This was on right by the Park Central Hotel, right? They were selling this famous pork hamburger, hamburguesa they call it, right? To tourists. $7 for a hamburger, 7 kooks for a hamburger, right? There were no Cubans in line there, but there were a lot of tourists in line there buying these things. And I love the way they were dressed up, and I'm like, oh my God, look at this, right? So that's food. What time is that? I can make this briefer here if I need to. Any comments yet?
Yeah, we have a couple. I'm just looking for my clock. Oh, okay, it's almost 8:15. So there was a little bit of discussion about the bus, and Jim thought it maybe was French Canadian because it didn't look like French language.
Could be.
And Deb was commenting.
Could very well be. The Canadians, there's a lot of Canadians there. So écolier, yeah.
There's another comment that you see American used school buses all over Latin America. They're sold there.
Okay.
Another comment that their currency has changed recently, and if you're planning to go there, you can't use your credit card.
Right. Got to carry cash.
And let's see. Linda is commenting that in her last trip in November 2019, pre-pandemic, she saw serious food and fuel shortages, and now people are standing in long lines, socially distanced, waiting to get whatever they can. And distancing is abnormal for Cubans. The new hotels are empty, the restaurants are empty, the tourism is really cut down. It's very sad. And then she also had a question, could you explain dollar stores versus the stores where Cubans shop?
Yes. So I'll start with that, and then I'll go back to that comment about the food shortages, because
Sure.
that is real, and I want to talk about that for a minute. I was going to talk about that. You basically, when you're in Havana, you'll see where tourists go, and the neighborhood where most tourists spend their time is Habana Vieja, and then another section over in the Vedado. If you're in those two areas, when you're walking into stores or restaurants, most of the times they're taking kooks. And you will see that a lot of times Cubans are not going into those stores. It's like, this is what the tourists want. This is a nice restaurant or a nicer restaurant. This is where you can buy, you can't really buy souvenirs, you know? I mean, this is just, but you can tell the difference, right? If you're in hotels or whatever, you're using the kook. If you're getting a taxi, if you're getting a petty taxi, right, a bicycle, you're using the kook. And the Cubans want to get a hold of those kooks whenever they can. If they can get a kook, they will take that over a peso. They will still make you change, but they might mark it up a little. Like my 8-cent cup of coffee might have been 4 cents. Okay. So you can use both at the different places. What you have to look for when you're looking at prices, like I went into a shoe store and I saw prices of 285 coops, but 10 kooks, right? Because the coop is 25 to 1, all right? So you got to look, is it CUP or CUC? And sometimes they'll, rarely, but occasionally they'll give you the two prices. All right, so I'll tell you, if you're going there as a tourist, you're going to use the kook, and nobody's going to turn you down. And really, you're not. If you go into Centro, then that's where you start seeing. Even there, they take the kook, especially at food places. But you see a lot more people using the kook. Now, the food shortages, and this is where, when you ask how did the Cubans were always welcoming. I never felt unsafe there, in part because we're all being watched all the time. I mean, I'll tell you that, you know. But there was euphoria on the first trip that was palpable to me when I said I was American. There was joy on the second trip. But by the third trip, I did start seeing food shortages, and I asked about that. I said, hey, you know, these produce places, they used to have a lot more tomatoes, they used to have a lot more this, a lot more that. You'd go to a restaurant and be like, oh, we're shut down for the day because we can't get a hold of eggs, you know. And what happened was so many American tourists went. I mean, it was like a deluge that they could not keep up the food supply to feed everyone. And unfortunately, the hotels with the big money, they always had the food. You needed food, you'd go in there, you'd get it. But if you were going to a place run by a Cuban, a local establishment or whatever, they were having a tough time. And it was also tough in the markets. You could see that. So that is the downside of that. And that is why the embargo is such a hindrance there. You know, they were excited about Obama. And they still think he was a very good president. But they said, to be honest, other than more tourists coming, nothing really changed. The embargo never got lifted. They hate Trump. And the Cubans are very well informed on US and world politics. You know, I used to think it was a very controlled media, but it's not. They get all our TV shows, they get our news, they get everything. They know what's going on. They see CNN, you know. And as of the second year, they had the internet. It was easier to get a hold of the internet, which I'll do in a thing in a minute. Anyway, so answer those questions.
Yeah, I have a question, Conrad. I was there in 2015 when you were, but I was there a little later. And we ate at Paladar's because the restaurants were really not allowed by the government because that was a way to make money in a capitalistic way. So Paladar's were the big houses with kitchens that allowed the folks to serve dinners to the tourists. Is that still there now since you were back more recently than I was?
Great question. Yes, the Paladars are there. And if any of you ever decide to go to Cuba, I mean, the US has a list of hotels you can't stay in that are run by the Cuban government, okay? I would say don't even stay in a hotel. If you can, stay in a Casa Particular and eat in Paladars. Those are small businesses, like you saw in the very first picture, that people are setting up and the government is allowing it. And that money is going directly to those people. Now, they'll still be taxed on it and stuff like that, but it's not like the Cuban government running it. It is very different. And Gerardo explained that to me. So the Paladars are still there. What's neat about them is, you know, like a lot in Cuba, everything's done on the improvise. You know, when I go in, a lot of times, you know, they'll say, hey, I go, what's for dinner tonight? They bring, well, we got these 4 fishes. Which one would you like? You know, they bring the fishes out. Oh, we got, you know, this and that. What would you like? There's no menu. It's just like, here's what you got. How would you like us to cook it? And I've had some wonderful meals like that. Wonderful meals. You can still go to the restaurant for something quick and easy, and you know that you don't even have to question what's in it. You know, it's probably flown in from a European nation and stuff, and but it won't feel any different than going to a hotel or a restaurant here. So I would go with that. Other questions?
One comment, could you address the inequity about cultural access by tourists versus by Cubanos? Culture is their lifeblood.
Repeat the question for me, Courtney.
Yeah, Linda, feel free to unmute if I'm watching your question. But I think she's asking about the inequity about accessing culture between tourists or Cubanos.
Oh, for tourists accessing culture versus the typical Cuban accessing culture?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Culture is a broad term. I mean, if you're asking about accessing museums, music, art, first of all, music is everywhere, and it's unbelievable, right? I mean, it's just, I'd walk into, I'll show you pictures when I'm in a park and there's just these guys playing mariachi music, right? So music, everybody's got access to that. And the government actually supports musicians and the arts in a phenomenal way. They really do. They encourage that. They know it's good for tourism, but it's just part of the culture. So in that sense, there's that. But in terms of going out to eat in restaurants and stuff like that, you know, I mean, there's definitely there were Cuban restaurants and there were tourist restaurants. And when I go to a Cuban restaurant, I mean, I could buy lunch for $1.40, and that would be a couple of hot dogs. I mean, I'm not talking fine gourmet food, but it'd be a couple of hot dogs, a soda, because when I'm shooting, I'm eating light anyway, and some ice cream. I mean, it was like, right? And the interesting part was, at that place, I noticed there were two lines. There was a line for the Cubans and a line for the tourists. And if I waited in the line for the tourists, the only thing it got me was a seat in the garden and 25% more. I mean, 25 times what the amount was. I wasn't getting the meal for $1.40, right? So I was like, okay, I can find my own bench somewhere.
Oh my God.
You know, you do have to be careful when you're eating. One thing hotels and restaurants will do is you'll get filtered water, and you know everything is cooked perfectly, you know. I was invited into a house, and I'll tell you about that later, Ciso's house. And, you know, his mother, Ophelia, gave me a cup of coffee, and that night I paid for it, you know, big time. Oh, you know, you start to get a little wary of certain things, but
Conrad, could I ask a question? The
Mhm.
reason I asked about the inequity is that many clubs that Cubans are accustomed to attending, music clubs, there are also two lines, and the Cubans stand aside, and if there are tourists there, they are allowed in, to the exclusion of the Cubanos, who are given free access when possible. So I noticed this many times, and I don't think many people, many outsiders are aware of this. There's also scalping, which is to be discouraged because it undermines the system. So that was what I was gently alluding to.
I got yes, and that wasn't uniform throughout, but I clearly saw that. I mean, just that example with the food, where we were buying the same food. Now, granted, the tourists were paying more money, but the line was almost non-existent, and they got to sit down in a lovely setting as soon as they got the food, you know, whereas the Cubans, they waited in a much longer line. And, you know, so there's clearly that. The couple of places I went to that were actually like actual concerts and stuff. There was this new place, which is written up in all the guidebooks, Fabrica Arte de Cubano, right?
Yeah.
It's an old, it's not a cigar factory, it's an old peanut oil factory, an old oil factory. And they have turned it into a multi-purpose sort of museum, music, food place. And when I went there, it was quite the mix of Cubans and tourists. Everybody was in there. But I would say that it wasn't your average Cuban in there, because it wasn't outrageously expensive, but it wasn't cheap either if you're earning, you know, $20 to $40 a month to get into. So there's that level of filtering. So let me move on with work. I don't want to, I really appreciate you guys hanging in there with me. What I'm going to show you with work is the Cubans rebuilding it. And the big thing you'll notice is that so much is still done by hand. You know, okay, I lost, here we go. There we go. All right, you can see how these buildings in the background, they've been renovated and stuff. This is in Vieja. You see some of the beautiful colors and stuff like that. And the government has a lot to do with that. But then you'll also see private people who want to build like a Casa Particular or something like that, or improve their house, right? That's being done by hand. Those bags have pea stone in it. Those bags must weigh 200 pounds a piece, all right? And they had ridden them on their bicycle, and these two guys were bringing them up 3 flights of stairs. I was like, oh my God, right? This was Gerardo's second place. The first place I stayed at Gerardo, this is why I couldn't stay with him the second year. He'd bought another house down the street on Industria and was building a new one, which this is now a beautiful hallway. I wish I put that picture in there, but here's a guy working on it. They're pulling up cement, pouring it, starting to get things ready, but they're doing it by bucket and, you know, just stuff like that. These guys were across the street from the old place. And the guy on the right without the shirt had gotten a hold of this building, And he and his buddies were going to eventually fix it up. That's the inside. You can see what they're, how they're setting up scaffolding and stuff like that. And, you know, so much is done by hand. The recycle, restore. These guys were restoring old shutters, which you see beautiful old shutters and stuff, you know. Well, you can see the work they're doing. There is a power tool there, right? There's a fan. See the guy in the blue with the red hat? See what he's doing? Those are the old nails they pulled out of shutters, and they're going to save them and reuse them again, right? The shutters weren't just burned or thrown out or ripped apart. They were pulled each nail, got it so that when they put the new wood in, they got nails to work with, you know. These guys were restoring old doors, and this is what I mean about OSHA. They were burning off the old paint and then scraping it off. You can see where the blue was on the, you know, if you go down on the door that's on the table, you can see where the old blue was. He scraped that off, and then that was the door in the background that he'd refinished. This guy, people would bring them their aluminum pots and pans, and he'd just brush them up and just clean them that way a little bit. And this is an example of a house. The guy you see in the striped shirt owns a Paladar. And he'd made considerable money with the Paladar. And he fixed up this house, which went up 2 stories. And you can see the beautiful, you know, work that he did to try and bring it back to what it formerly looked like. So you're seeing that in different, but you see it, the building next to it looks like it's about to fall down, and then you'll see this, you know. And the hope is eventually somebody, you know, will get that other building and fix it up. Downtime, I call it. Just take pictures of, you know, kids. I love this one. It's 2 boys after my own heart. They got those little circular bearings that you find. They ran some wood through it. They've got 3 metal circular bearings, and the back wheels and the front steering, which he then steers with his hands there, and they're pushing his go-kart up at breakneck speed up and down the sidewalks. I was like, look at these guys, right? Some girl in an amusement park. There's so many others I can show you here. This was the day after. This was 2015 when Cuba won the Caribbean Cup in baseball. It is their World Series. And I remember the night before walking through the neighborhood, right? And everybody's cheering and hooting and hollering. All the windows, you know, the houses, the windows, they're always open. The doors are always open, right? And people, you know, not everybody has a TV, so they'll be clustered around outside looking at and stuff. And I was like, what's everybody's watching tonight? So I went in, oh, Gerardo, what's on? I said, it's the World Cup. It's the 7th game. Cuba's winning. It's the 9th inning. So I'm like, I go in, I gotta watch this. Like, and it was great. It was great. It was like watching the World Series here. The day after, I'm out in the streets, and every boy who got out of school, man, had a bat or a ball in his hand that day. And these guys were right on the Malecon there. These 2 were just pitching and hitting and stuff. You know, I was just like, oh my God. Dominoes is the national game of Cuba. Everybody plays dominoes. And second year, one of the biggest changes I saw, internet, I used to have to go into one of the hotels to get internet. They had set up, when I came back the second time, they had set up 3 small parks in Havana, which had internet. And you could go there, and you, for 2 kooks or 50 coops, you could buy an internet card that was good for an hour. And people were just like talking to family all over the world, getting internet from all over the world. You know, and it was just, well, the guy in the middle is not gonna do the internet, but she's got it. And it was just amazing to see. I did not see that the first time. You know, and everybody in this 1 block area, not even 1 block, it was like a little park, you know. Everybody was on their phone and just talking, and just, it's amazing.
Conrad, I want to interrupt you because
Yep.
Jay had a question that goes with all these photos. He said, I'm struck by the number of photos you take in which the subject or subjects are looking at you directly. I guess it goes with other photos too. I know you engage with them when taking the photo. Can you describe a typical interaction? For example, the two people in the orange shirts, that was a while back. I think it was a while back with the buildings.
With the buildings? These guys?
Yeah.
Okay. These guys I actually had a very brief conversation with. You'll see when I get to people, I can go into detail in the conversations, but I noticed this door that seemed to go to nowhere outside, right? That they were spending a lot of time fixing up. And it actually took them 3 days. I went back and have the whole series. But, you know, I was just saying, you know, so little Spanish, but I'm like, you know, poeta and this and the guy is just like, see, and you know, he's like, he showed me a little bit of the mortar and stuff he was going to use, and they were setting up the blue there, and then he just stood there. And when I saw him and the other man in the orange shirt up there, I said, that's it, click. So there wasn't a huge bunch of talking there. I don't pose anybody if that's part of what the question is. I don't pose anybody, but if I ask someone, can I take your picture? They will often strike a pose or something like that. But I never say, could you stand here? Could you look this way or do that or whatever? It's like, just, okay, I'll take your picture. What had we gotten up to? We were on the games and the internet park and okay, here we go. I like barbershops, what can I say? So there's a whole bunch of barbershops. Let's see. This guy, I visited him 3 times, all right? And he moves this chair one time, but he's a solo guy. He shows up in that white starched shirt every day, all right? Guys come and sit in that chair, and this is where they get their old time haircut and shave. That's a straight razor. See the shave he's getting there? It's not a safety razor. That's a razor. And this guy is a master. And the pride in his work is unbelievable. By the way, the guy who was working on the boombox, he's one to the left here. All right, so you get the boombox repair guy, you got this guy, you got these guys back here doing some other electronics, right? Mecanico de refrigeración, you know, they fix refrigerators, I guess, but he had his chair in there. I just love it. Here's some other barbershops. I'm assuming it's a barbershop. This could be Miami, but it's not, it's Havana. And then I had to go to the nail salon there for that one. Okay, the people, Los Habaneros. This is what, I mean, by the second trip, I realized it was the people I wanted to photograph. And these two, this is 10 in the morning, right? You don't see bakeries there. You know, I don't know where people get cakes. Oh, I do. You would see sometimes people selling cakes out on the street who had baked it in their house. And it was like, hey, you want to buy a cake? You want to buy a pastry, right? So maybe they knew someone who baked these cakes, right? And it was 10 in the morning and I see these two, right? And I go, you know, today, cumpleaños, your birthday, right? They're laughing and I know. And I started talking. I said, well, that's a great looking cake. I said, well, what are you celebrating? He said, nothing. So we like cake. And these two were just going to take off and have cake at 10 in the morning. I was like, I love it. This is my second day on the first trip. Third day on the first trip. And this is Eduardo. This is 6 in the morning. I showed you that picture where they had the pigs that they were starting to cut open. I just walked another block. He was sitting on a stoop back there eating a lemon. And he looked at me. He goes, hey, in English, where are you from? And at that point, I was still like, do I say I'm an American? What do they think of Americans, right? And I was thinking of saying Canada, but I said, Estados Unidos? And his eyes went like bug open, right? He goes, he got up, he goes, come here. I want to show you something, right? And he pulls up his shirt and there's the Statue of Liberty, right? And I was like, oh my God. And again, not knowing much yet, I said, do you mind if I take your picture? He goes, no, no. I said, this is okay. I mean, the Statue of Liberty, is there a problem if this gets shown? You know, I want permission if I'm going to show it. I don't have anybody sign anything, but I don't want to get anybody in trouble either putting it on the internet, right? He says, no, no, go ahead, take it, take it. So he gets that. He goes, I love America. It's just, And then he turns around and he goes, look at this. And that's his back. Freedom has no price, right? And so we talked, right? And I'm like, God, you know, he says, yeah, it's great having you here. This is exciting. I hope this opens up things, you know, and do this and that. And we talked and talked. And finally, at the end, I'm leaving. He goes, I hate to do this, right? And I thought, okay, maybe he's going to ask me for some money, because sometimes when you take pictures, people want money, right? I said, what would, you know, he says, do you have some deodorant? I was like, well, not here, but, you know, I have some back at my casa, right? If you want, I can go get it and bring it to you tomorrow, right? He goes, deodorant and toothpaste. If you could get that, that would be great, right? And that's before I realized how limited some of these things were in the store and how expensive they could be for them. I didn't see him again the next day. I didn't see him till my third trip, when I brought back a book with his picture in it. And Gerardo said, that's Eduardo. I said, you know Eduardo? He says, yeah, he's out in front of the house almost every morning. Sure enough, the next morning I get up and there's Eduardo. I'm like, so we reconnected, and it was amazing, you know. So those are some of the things that happen on the street. This it surprised me when I saw it, because Cuba is a Latin American country, and machismo is just sort of part of the norm, right? And I'm walking down the street and I see this guy coming, and I'm like, really? And this, again, is stuff I discovered later. So I saw him and I said, hey, you know, Shakira, I like your shirt. Right? So we started talking. And I asked him, I said, do you mind if I take a picture? He goes, no, no, no. I said, hey, take my picture. He says, if you want me, come meet me at this club, you know, tomorrow night, Mixto. And so later I looked it up, right? And I'm like, okay, let me find out what's going on here. The Cuban government, Fidel imprisoned homosexuals at the very beginning, like vastly. Imprisoned, killed, whatever. He wanted nothing to do with them. His niece said, that's got to stop. And in the 90s, Cuba really reversed its whole policy regarding lesbians, gays, homosexuals. And it's like, no. And as a matter of fact, to the point where they said, if you're looking for a gender change operation, we will pay for that as part of the medical system, you know. So you still have the cultural aspect of machismo, but you have a government that states its support of gay, lesbian, queer culture. I mean, it's just there, and it's out there. And you know, the more I started looking, I'm like, oh my gosh, see, there it is. It's like, you know, didn't have to be closeted. It's kind of like what's going on now here, but you know, I was surprised to see it in Cuba, you know. And there was one brief encounter. I didn't go to the club. I didn't, you know, but it was just interesting. It opened my eyes up to a couple of things. There's a large Chinese Cuban population there. This woman was coming home. She's a plasterer. I just saw her and she looked exhausted, and she was going right past the hotels. Sorry about that. What do you do to me? Can you guys, okay. She was going right past the hotels where all the tourists were, and exhausted. And there was something about her face. And I said, do you mind if I take your picture? We had no exchange, unfortunately, but that's her. This is George. This is just before Eduardo. And I see this guy and I'm like, what? And I go up to him, I go, pantalones, right? He goes, my pants? I said, you speak English? He goes, yeah. I said, well, how'd you learn English? He says, I was born in Brooklyn. I lived there till I was 14. I said, how'd you end up in Cuba? He said, my parents came just before the revolution. I've been stuck here ever since. I'm like, honest to God, that's a quote. That's a verbatim quote. So George, was my first introduction. He gave me so much information. I said, George, you mind if I take a picture? No, no, go ahead, go ahead. And he said, that's a nice camera. I said, you worried walking around with that camera? I said, well, you know, Gerardo told me last night that I got the police are down there and I don't do anything stupid, but I'll be safe, right? He says, Gerardo's right. He says, you're in Cuba now. He says, you know, Havana's got 2 million people, 1 million of them are secret police. You're being watched all the time, so am I. And nobody's going to touch you. So I was like, okay. I didn't know whether to believe it or not, but I heard that 3 other times. But he was just fascinating. And the thing during our 20, 30-minute conversation, there was a guy watching us across the street all the time who came over and he said, George, who's this, right? And he was affable enough. And George was telling me the story. And, you know, we got into politics a little bit, right? George was like, boy, I'd love to get to America. You know, I'm stuck here. I said, well, it's a nice place, but, you know, I said, we got our problems too. And I said, you know, sometimes our government does some odd things like Guantanamo. He goes, oh yeah, Guantanamo's no good, you know. But the other guy listened the whole time. And I was like, okay, I got it. And George doesn't want to tip me off another thing photographically. He said, look, when you're taking pictures, all right, I said, well, I always let people know. He says, well, that's good. And if somebody says no, don't take their picture. The worry here is that you'll go back to the United States, post it on Facebook, and we don't know what you're going to say. And if you say something wrong, who knows? Like, got it. You know, so you learn a lot from people on the street. This is Martha. Third trip. It's I go into a church and I was like, geez, I thought the religion was suppressed here. Catholic church, go in, there's the priest doing mass. And at the end I was like, huh, and I walk out with this woman. I walk a couple of blocks and she just fascinated me. And I just, hola, you know, ¿cómo está? And she looked at me, she goes, you American? I said, yeah. So no. She goes, oh, I love your country. She said, I was there when I was 14 and when I was 16. My father took me twice, once to New York, once to Philadelphia, right? Said, I'm from New York. I said, what did you see? Da, da, da. So we had this nice conversation. And she says, well, welcome to my country. And I said, well, thank you. And I said, someday I hope you can go back, you can come visit America again. Hopefully things open up. She just looked away for a minute and the eyes went far away. She goes, maybe, but at this point, memories are wonderful, right? And I was just like, oh my God, you know. There's Cecil. Cecil I've seen a couple of times too. He invited me into his house to meet his mother. Interesting character. He's a Marielita. He came over on the Mariel boat lift in the 80s to the United States. Because when I saw him, he gave another one. You American? Yeah. Oh my God, where are you from? New York, Boston. He goes, oh, Larry Bird, Mike. You know, I'm like, yeah, how do you know so much about American basketball? He says, well, I was there for 14 years, right? So really? He says, yeah, I went over on the Mariel boat lift. He said, well, what happened? He says, well, I worked in Chicago. I did this or that. I ended up in New Orleans and doing a Mardi Gras celebration. I was out celebrating and I fired a gun into the air. And I'm like, okay. He says, well, the cops saw me, saw who I was. They sent me right back, right? I said, oh. I said, well, I'm sorry. He looked at me and goes, what are you sorry for? I'm home again. This is great. I was like, there was a whole story there that needed exploring after that, you know. And he said, I want you to meet my mother. So that takes us to family. The house is in the background there. The chicken's on top, laying eggs. Everybody has chickens if they can. This boy just had come home from, it doesn't look like he came home from school, but he does have a backpack on. And this is his older brother giving him a hug as he came in. This house, see the guy in the blue? See the hat? The guy in the blue and the red door, that's his brother. The house is in there, right? And I was just photographing these guys out here and him and the dog that's chained up there. And then when he went in, I thought, oh, let me go in and take some pictures in there. And that's when that kid walked in and that happened, you know. it's a Latin culture, and it's kind of wonderful to see that kind of, you know, just hugs, and at the end of the school day on the street, hugs happen all the time. There's Cecil, that's his mother Ophelia. There's the two brothers. I'm trying to remember the two brothers' names. I have them written down. The one next to, not Cecil, but the one next to Ophelia, he does all these paintings here, and he sells them. So here's Ophelia showing me one of his paintings of the patron saint of Havana, which she gave to me. I have that here. That we're in the house there, and that's where they live. Before I left, you know, I said, look, is there anything I can, if I ever come back, because I'm planning to come back every year, anything I can bring you? And what they said was paintbrushes for my brother. He said he paints these by pulling hair from his head, and he ties it on sticks, and he does it that way, you know? So I was like, okay. And I came back, you'll see a picture later. I came back and I didn't, there was a gap in there, but I found him the next year. I had to hunt him down because I couldn't remember the address, and I was on the street showing his picture. So I'll tell you that in a minute. This is just the innovation again. This guy, this is his father's camera, old view camera. What he did is it fell apart, but he had the lens. And so he adapted the camera. And not only does it take the picture, but it's got the darkroom right inside. So what he does with tourists is, he says, you want a picture? What you see in front of there is the negative. He had just taken a picture of two people, processed it in there, took the negative out, the paper negative, put it on that, was rephotographing it to make a positive. And then you'd have your picture. And I was like, that being a photographer and having done darkroom work, I'm like, that's brilliant. There's the lens cap on, because right now he's just focusing. He pulls the lens cap off because he doesn't have a shutter anymore. He pulls the lens cap off and puts it back on after a couple of seconds. And we get the image. And there's this woman with the cell phone taking the same picture. I was like, you gotta love it. And there he's working in there, getting there, and out comes the picture. And I thought, that is brilliant, right? And he's pretty famous. He was written up in a Miami newspaper, which I found out again later. I brought him some photographic paper because he said, this is amazing. He says, hey, you're from America. You've ever come back here? Bring me some photographic paper, RC paper. I said, you got it. You know, there's the picture. There's the picture of the family you just taken, right? Just the innovation, the brilliance. It's just like, I love it, right? So I'll just finish up here quickly. 3 neighborhoods, Vieja, Centro, and Vedado. These are just pictures from the street, random images. Nighttime, there's the car. That's 1 block off one of the main tourist streets. You know, the tourist street is all beautifully redone, and then you hit this. That's what a typical afternoon in Havana looks like. People coming out. This is February, doing their marketing, kids home from school, summer plan, coming home from work. This is what the stores look like. I think they sold eggs here, if I remember. There's Cecil. That's the year when I went back to re-find him. I forgot his, so I had his picture. And I'm walking up and down the street. I say, do you know this guy? He lives somewhere around here. And I happened to find his cousin. She says, Cecil? Yeah, come with me. And I went to get Cecil, and there's his brother and his family on the right. These are some of his friends. They're all hanging out in front. And this one I loved because I told you most of the dogs are just, you know, untethered. But somebody went through some, I don't know where she found it, but she had this elaborate harness. And I was like, gotta get a picture of that. That's the Malecon. And this was on one of the main shopping streets and tourist streets. And it seemed like 16 or 17 groups of dance organizations got together, and they were just performing for each other. It's really pretty neat. This was a Sunday on, again, one of the main shopping streets, and they were celebrating Havana's, I don't know, 500th anniversary or something. And they're cooking up pigs, and then people were eating outside. And this was just one of those serendipitous moments. This couple was getting married. They wanted pictures on the Malecon. They rented the car. They had this stuff. Let's do it. See a lot of kids with Disney stuff. And I'll end with that. I saw this woman walking down the street. And she got by me and I'm like, I can't let this go by. And I turned around and I went after her and I'm like, can I get your picture? She looked at me like, huh? And then she strikes that pose. I'm like, thank you. And off she went. Thank you, guys. I'll take questions now. I appreciate your patience here.
Thank you, Conrad. Everyone should feel free to unmute. I mean, if you'd like me to read your question, you're welcome to type, but feel free to chime in.
Conrad, I have a question. Do you, with the post Castro group, do you think there's going to be a move towards democracy at any time soon, or is it going to be solid communist going forward in the future?
That's a very good question.
That's mute.
Pete, am I on mute? No. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep. Yes.
Okay. You get mixed reactions in Cuba. There are people that genuinely love Fidel and what he did for them. I mean, look, I'm of an age, I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, and people my age who were there remember the revolution. And there were certain guys, like one guy whose house I stayed in, he says, you know, look, I know for some people this has been miserable, but for me, I got an education, I was a teacher, I got to travel the world, I run this now. I would have been castrating bulls on a farm, something I hated to do my whole life, right? So Fidel was good for me. I met another guy who's 77 and he's peddling a pedicab. And he goes, my family had money. We lost everything. Look at me, I'm 77 and I'm peddling this cab. This sucks. Politically, I don't see it changing quickly. I really don't. I think that the people who are in charge of the government, you know, like a lot of places, you know, you've got power is going to stay with power. But there is a strong push among the people to really get some more freedoms, some more independent. I mean, one of the things I would say to our government is like, look, work on lifting that embargo and trying to set up some businesses, because the people over there who will benefit from tourism and stuff like that and want to set up businesses can then say, look, this makes sense. This old system doesn't, you know, kind of like what happened in Vietnam, to be honest. I mean, we're doing business with them all the time. So there's a strong push to change things. There is a push. What'll happen? I don't know. I just don't know.
Conrad, could you comment on the educational system in Cuba, particularly K through 12, elementary, junior high, high school, but also higher education?
Higher education, I didn't have much experience with, but being a teacher, every time I saw a school, I wanted to get in there. And I got to tell you, I was impressed. I was expecting an education system which was highly doctrine driven. I was expecting an education system which was much more of present, learn, memorize, right? That's not what I saw at all.
Wow.
I saw group work. I walked into a couple of English classes, you know, for 9-year-olds, and I was like, really? Look at this, right? I wish I'd included some of those pictures. The kids were working in groups. The teacher was running great lessons. I was very impressed by the education system. Now, I only stayed in Havana. I didn't travel the whole country. And I stayed in 3 neighborhoods. So kind of like here, you know. But I did go into Centro, which is a poor area, Vedado, which is a richer area, and Vieja, which is where the tourists are, and they probably want to keep things looking good there. But it was pretty consistent throughout. And I was impressed with the teaching techniques.
Good. Thank you.
Other questions on travel or anything like that?
Muted. It says it's muted. I don't know. This is Steve. I was gonna just say, when I went there a few years ago, it was a really interesting experience. It's a good experience, but it was really complicated, right? But I would say that there is a lot of tourism. It's just not American tourism. And you saw like the Melancon. I remember I was the one that said it was sad to see so many of the buildings wrecked with the hurricanes. Yet I was really surprised to see like European money building really fancy hotels, but in the exact same spot. You could see where they were going to get hit with water. It was just surprising to me that they were doing that.
I think I don't know who just spoke, but thank you for saying that, because one of the things I question, you can see the plus side of tourism, but you can also see the negative side.
Well, maybe it isn't.
And
Maybe it isn't.
I'm sorry, did I unmute? Am I muted?
No, you're fine, Conrad. You're
Okay.
fine.
You can also see the downside, and a lot of European and Canadian hotel groups are coming in and building, and I'm not sure how much that money is staying in Cuba, what kind of arrangements they have. If you go into those hotels, that's why I say stay in a Casa Particular if you can. I'd step into the Park Central Hotel. I was like, I just left Cuba. I mean, it was like that dramatic. You leave Cuba when you walk into places like that. But the flip side is, the economy needs something. Tourism could be a welcome 10, 15% of their GDP,
And just had one last quick question, comment around that too. So I went to play softball and I was very conscious about what I was eating and drinking because I wanted to make sure that I could play. And I'd heard really bad stories about, be careful what you're eating because it could make you sick. So I've heard that like the European tourists, they're a different kind of water than we have, I guess, in the States, and they're more tolerant of it. So I've really enjoyed the Cuban food, but I've had to find Cuban restaurants around Greater Boston area to go to because I wasn't eating it when I was there.
Right. Got it. Yeah, you do. I mean, I was cognizant of it too. I think anytime you travel, the flora in the water is just different than your water. And even if you go to Europe, you can get sick drinking the water there. It's kind of like, what's the risk you take? How do you do it? But yeah, I mean, I was cognizant of it.
I have a comment.
Go for it.
I was in Cuba a couple of years ago, and one of the best trips I ever took. But talking about the problem with the water is fine. The problem is the sewage. The sewage gets from the pipes, gets into the water. The sewage is just terrible. It needs millions of dollars worth of repair. Another comment is the thing that would help the Cuban economy is to get the cruise ships back from the US to Cuba. That would really, really help.
Yeah. I mean, that was the biggest change I saw was between year 1 and year 2. And that's when statistically what I read in the papers was that US tourism to there had increased 5-fold. And it just brought so much money into that country. I mean, too much, it's staying the system.
One of the positive things when I was there is the healthcare. The healthcare system in Cuba works, and people are well cared for there. That's another thing which I was very surprised. And another interesting thing that people might enjoy is transportation to get to one point of Cuba to the other point is unbelievable. The people, they take these box trucks, right, and they put seats in these box trucks and they travel for miles and miles on a wooden bench on a box truck, which is amazing. And believe it or not, is they still use the horse and buggy to get from point A to point B.
They do.
I love Cuba, and I would tell anybody to please go. It's a great place to visit.
Yeah, it's not an easy trip physically because you're constantly dealing with you don't have all the creature comforts that you would traveling in first world countries. But I would say it's well worth going and fascinating. About the medical system, that's something real quick. with the fall of the Soviet Union, they lost a lot of funding and support that they needed for the medical system. What they had built was a phenomenal training. I mean, Gerardo was a doctor, and their schools for medicine were unbelievable, and they were exporting doctors all over the world, to all over South America, Central America, Africa. You know, you needed help, Cuba will send it, and cheap. And they had up-to-date medicine. Not quite as cutting edge now, but the last I read a couple of years ago was that life expectancy and certain diseases, they do much better with than we do. And I think it's for a variety of reasons. One is the diet is different. It's a lot more physical, you get a lot more exercise. And thirdly, they do mandate certain things. They're prenatal. If you're pregnant and you don't go see a doctor within 6 weeks of finding out, they can throw you in jail. And they will. It's like, no, this is not your choice. You know, you show up to the doctor. And they're very big on preventive medicine, you know. You got to do this if you want this, because we can't help you with this if you let this go too far. You know, so it's a different mindset.
Can I make one more comment?
One
Is-
for all attitude. Everyone pitches in when it comes to distribution and sharing of meds, and their COVID response has been people going door to door, checking on people and giving them immune boosting supplements and keeping records, and they've done a marvelous job. So it's a very different
Yeah,
society.
that doesn't surprise me. I was there when Zika broke out. And,
Yes, yes.
They
And
would
dengue,
just
spraying
on
for
top of
dengue.
Zika, like, you know, we're getting rid of these mosquitoes, and you know, I mean, everywhere you turn, they're taking care of Zika.
I think we'll take one or two more questions or comments.
I have an interesting comment. Is back maybe 10, 15 years ago, the coral reefs in Cuba were disappearing. They were very sick. So finally, someone came out and figured what the problem was. When the Russians were helping Cuba, they used tons and tons of fertilizer. So after the Russians left and they weren't using fertilizer, the coral reefs, you know, grew back, and that they got healthy again. I found that interesting too.
That is interesting, yeah.
Thank you. Any more
Well,
comments?
thank you all for hanging in there with me. Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you,
And
Conrad. Wonderful
Good to see a
photos.
lot of familiar faces. And did somebody ask for the website, Courtney? Can you make that available?
Yeah, I posted that, and yeah, I'll send it to everyone who signed up.
All right.
But thank you again for presenting and for everyone joining us.
Thank you. Stay safe, guys.
Stay safe.
Thank you,
Have a great
Conrad. That
day.
Thank you, Conrad.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.